In 40 years, the Congressional Black Caucus has grown from a loosely organized coalition of post-civil rights black legislators to an influential force in modern politics.
Well, I think that the CBC has definitely been, in many ways, a conscience of the Congress.
The CBC has had its highs.
We've been really on the front lines of almost all of the major legislation.
And it's had its lows.
Over the past couple of Congresses, the CBC has had a very tense relationship with the ethics committees in the House because they are overwhelmingly the focus of ethics investigations.
This is the story of the rise of African American political power in the United States. This is the story of the Congressional Black Caucus. When President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, there were only 4 black members in the United States Congress. Their numbers had once been stronger. In the years and decades following Reconstruction, 22 African Americans served. But by the 1960s, Jim Crow laws had largely frozen them out of local and national politics.
Life in the American South, when I was growing up, was not easy for African Americans. People could not register to vote simply because of the color of their skin.
When I got elected to Congress, between the Mississippi River and the Pacific Ocean, there had been only one black member of Congress.
The effects of that lack of representation were far-reaching.
In many parts of the South, in those areas where African American owned land, the local elected official would refuse to pave the road or provide sewage service.
The passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the Supreme Court's decision affirming one man, one vote changed everything. African Americans could finally register to vote. And now their numbers would be accurately reflected when drawing up legislative districts. By the late 1960s, African Americans had, for the first time in history, a block of elected officials representing their interests.
Unless we were coordinated in some way, there was a lot of important legislation and discussion that we could be sharing that we're missing without a more formal organization.
In 1969, the 9 black members formed a loose-knit group they called the Democratic Select Committee. 2 years later, their number grew to 13. Congressman Bill Clay, fearing a loss of focus without a more formal structure, suggested the creation of an official organization. The Congressional Black Caucus was born.
Our mission then was, as I said, was to increase the number of blacks in professional positions here, and also to go nationwide in terms of trying to increase the number of blacks elected to Congress.
In essence, the CBC's original goals when they were founded were to fight discrimination and to deal with the effects throughout the country on African Americans of that discrimination.
The deaths of civil rights icons who championed nonviolence and the rise of black power groups like the Black Panthers left black leadership at a crossroads.
What the Black Caucus did was to try and bring all of these groups together so that we would get an opinion and a position that reflected the majority of the opinions in black America, and we would push for that. We would not have one individual spokesman.
Perhaps the biggest boost to the CBC's legitimacy in that first year came from President Nixon, with whom they had a rocky relationship.
Unfortunately, we had to deal with President Nixon, who held us all in utter contempt.
We requested a meeting with President Nixon to discuss the plight of black America. He totally ignored us for months and months and months. But we kept agitating, kept increasing the pressure on him.
Things culminated when the CBC boycotted Nixon's 1971 State of the Union. Nixon finally agreed to the meeting, and CBC members pressed him to adopt more policies that would help African Americans.
We had all of the research for every one of those recommendations that we presented to him, and he couldn't refute them. I mean, Black America was in a state of terrible conditions.
His avoiding of us like a cancer, his lack of respect for us as members of Congress, caused more people to tolerate and to help us to decide just what role we would play.
Several months after the Nixon meeting, the CBC held its first annual dinner. It was the fledgling organization's coming out party.
The evening was tremendously exciting. The entertainment was great with Nancy Wilson, Billy Eckstein, and Dick Gregory.
Actor and activist Ossie Davis gave the keynote speech.
Ossie Davis, as the speaker, was very eloquent, and he spoke of,
"It's not the man, it's the plan. And it's not the rap, it's the map."
and it was electrifying. And people just stood up and cheered as if this was a new day for Black America. And that was the spiritual and political springboard for the Congressional Black Caucus.
In its early years, the CBC's mission was to build upon the gains of the civil rights movement.
Well, when we first started out, we were thinking about what do you do about Mississippi, and here's a problem in Alabama, and we were domestic.
CBC played a major role with other members to extend or renew the Voting Rights Act.
Over the years, the caucus also worked to establish a Martin Luther King national holiday, and its members heavily criticized apartheid in South Africa. As the caucus grew, it struggled to define its membership. Would the largely Democratic organization accept Black Republican members? What about whites who represented Black interests?
We made it clear that it was the Black Caucus, and eventually there was so much agitation for joining that after several years we set up an associate membership program.
Any African American can join the CBC. I mean, you know, we don't do a blood test. You don't have to fill out any papers. You don't, have to like NBA basketball. I mean, it's just, if you're Black, you join.
But in the CBC's history, only 2 of the 6 Black Republicans chose to join the caucus. Perhaps the CBC's most profound changes were geographic. Over its first 20 years, CBC members hailed mostly from northern and western urban districts. That all changed in the early 1990s.
Word came down in the early 1990s from the Justice Department that in those states that were covered by the Voting Rights Act, if it were possible to draw congressional districts that would be a majority-minority, you had to do so.
The 1992 election saw a wave of newly elected African Americans from the rural South.
We increased the size of the Congressional Black Caucus by about 40%.
Over the next 20 years, the caucus would grow even stronger in influence. When Democrats won the House in 2006, a record 5 Black members became chairs of key committees. The CBC's backing was crucial for winning Democratic leadership positions.
Nancy Pelosi, when she was first moving up the leadership ladder, for example, did a great deal to nurture support from the Congressional Black Caucus.
Their perspective is very important, and their participation in a leadership race, I think, is very important. I'm very fortunate that in just about every one of my races for leadership posts, I've enjoyed the support of the significant majority of the Congressional Black Caucus.
With Democrats in power, the House Ethics Committee began investigating the actions of several senior CBC members.
You end up with dozens of members being in a trip, all under investigation at once. You end up with a half dozen members individually being investigated for anything from small violations of improperly reporting a trip to large violations of failing to report hundreds of thousands of dollars of income.
CBC members say they have been unfairly targeted.
What is it that we have done as a foundation that has not been done by the Democratic National Committee, the Republican National Committee, the Democratic Campaign Committee in Congress, and the Republican Democrat in the Senate?
None of it comes anywhere near what other people have been accused of, the Abramoffs of the world and the what are some of these other people who it's a totally different thing.
I don't think that African Americans are being targeted. I think that there are very few of us who get ethics charges out of 43, but because we are a caucus and we all are the same color, it draws attention.
Ethics watchdogs agree that color is irrelevant. They say it's lack of accountability that can lead to corruption.
The CBC members generally win with a great majority, and they don't have very serious challengers, and so they don't have a lot of accountability. Their constituents back home don't seem to focus on that a great deal, as you can see, for example, in the fact that Rangel was returned to Congress and Maxine Waters has been returned to Congress.
This budget is extremely important because it is a photo of the people of the United States led by the President and the United States Congress.
In 2011, the CBC is once again at a crossroads. The caucus continues to advocate for minorities and the poor. It has criticized cuts to social programs in Republican budget proposals. But with Democrats in the minority, the caucus's power has become more symbolic than legislative. And a black president has some wondering if the CBC is still relevant in a post-racial America. What will become of the CBC in another 40 years is anyone's guess.
I just cannot wrap my mind around 40 years from now.
Another 40 years, there may not be a CBC.
The struggle for human rights and civil rights and dignity and for working people doesn't begin or end with any one president. And so I think that the CBC is actually even more relevant now.
I see where members are saying, once upon a time, the blacks had their own organization here because they felt this country had not been fair to them, and they would meet together.
If we are around 40 years from today, then we have failed miserably.